summer of '67, California, land of the free, where it never rains and the mountains touch the sea. In the summer of love.
I'd like to welcome everyone here in this cold night in this remote theater, which you found. Next month, we have Rose McGee, better known as a sweet potato lady.
Yes.
Sweet potato pie lady.
Yes.
And she has a very interesting and inspiring story. I'd like to introduce MaryAnn Strom, Jim McDonough. They're going to be our guest storytellers.
Now that I have your attention, some of you might have heard my story before. Some of you have not. But then again, at my age, when I repeat myself, it's like it's brand new anyway. Besides being a wife and mother, my professional career started out as a medical transcriptionist at the Mayo Clinic, followed by a professional private medical secretary in St. Cloud for an orthopedist, as well as several medical facilities in the Twin Cities. After the last physician moved to California, I lost my wedding ring. Oh, boo-hoo. Well, the bad news, I lost the ring. The good news, I was offered a job. So I was a licensed insurance professional for State Farm for 22 years. Following that, I became an office manager for an advertising agency that my daughter and her husband owned. And then finally assisted my daughter in a limousine company and also event planning. So I don't sit still too long. I've always enjoyed working with the public, but early on, I knew there was something missing. I just had that, I needed to have a creative outlet. So, since the age of 9, I have been interested in entertaining. Talent shows, plays, the Moose Lodge, the Legion, the old Lutheran Church basement shows, Elks Lodge, family gatherings, high school plays, whatever I could do. Well, since I was an only child, I missed having siblings. So I was overjoyed to be involved with our children and grandchildren, reading as different characters in local schools, including Montessori, Hopkins schools, St. Louis Park, St. David's Center in Minnetonka, Minneapolis Institute of Arts as the ice cream queen. And when one gets into character, it's so easy to act the part. I also feel fortunate that I have used dialects, as my mother was an immigrant, and my grandmother, they came over from Finland, and I learned to listen. And so I did dialects in many of my stories, including, I remember, Francois, we've got the good buck hooked up to the sled, from Call of the Wild. So we could always engage the children by changing voices and characters. Also, Mamacita Chiquita at Spanish immersion. Think at Mama Bunny, Little Bo Peep. And one of my favorites was when I dressed as the crazy, unsinkable Molly Brown. Oh boy, I had a hat with a plume and a big boa, and I read to a big troop of Boy Scouts. I was the only female in the room. I held that attention, talking about the night on the cold waters of the Titanic and everything I did to save those people going into my lifeboat. Apparently, I did a pretty good job, because at the end, a little boy came up to me and he said, "Were you really on the Titanic?" Well, I'm not either. I haven't aged very well. Or maybe I did an okay job reading for them. As I said, my mother coming from another country, I dressed up as an immigrant, as my grandmother, with my mother, her daughter, in tow, telling the story of crossing the ocean from Finland to America, an 8-day voyage in 1928 on the ocean liner SS Leviathan. And I've done some research. This was one of the ships that would take the immigrants from foreign countries. Now, also, I was able to find the ship's manifest, and I was able to find it online, made a copy, and I have my grandmother and my mother and the whole story. And all the other countries were people, well, some of them, this isn't the whole list, there were, 1,800 passengers. But I found this very interesting, and I shared that with children when I did an immigration story. Also, I had a magical moment in May of 2011. I've always been a fan of Julie Andrews. And she was in town in St. Paul at Harmar Mall. And she was out there doing book signing. And I thought, oh, I would love to have her book so I could use it when I read to children. So I go there with my husband at 7 in the morning. It was a bitterly cold day, and I'm in my full fairy godmother regalia, the only one dressed. A lot of people, but I was the only one in costume. And we waited and waited. It was about 2 hours, and they said, okay, no more tickets to be sold or given out. The lady in front of me got the last ticket. I was so disappointed. I didn't cry, but I wanted to. I so wanted to be there. And this young lady saw me, and she said, I want you to have my tickets. So she gave me the ticket that was going to be hers and her mother's to share that day. And so my husband and I got to meet Julie Andrews. And Julie Andrews was in a hello. She has such a deep voice now, since she's had throat problems. Hello, and she smirked at me. Why are you dressed in such a fashion? And I said, well, this is what I do. And I showed her a picture of my reading to school children. She was pretty impressed with that, I have to say, and autographed my book, of course, as she would. So anyway, over the years, my magic wand has truly proven its magic powers. I was going to St. David's in Minnetonka, and a little boy was crying uncontrollably. As he saw me enter the front lobby, I whisked my magic wand. I said, why, hello. Let's turn that frown upside down and make today a grand day. To which he immediately stopped crying. Well, I was shocked, actually. And he asked me, are you really the fairy godmother? And I said, yes, I am. So at times I have presented to classrooms which have been quite unruly. And if you haven't been in schools in these more modern times, it's very hard to discipline some children these days. I respect the teachers, they have so much to do. And oftentimes I come into a classroom and it was pretty much chaos. However, I pop out of the corner with my magic wand again, which works every time. And there's a hush that falls across the room. And then I say, the children, if they use their ears and sit their mouth, there might be a surprise at the end of my performance. And the little boy asked me, does the wand really have magic powers? And I said, if you believe, then it does. So anyway, we never know how we are affecting the lives of others through stories, spending one-on-one time. So may each of us continue to keep the magic in our lives, the love in our hearts, and share our magical powers with others. Thank you.
Wham bam, thank you, ma'am.
Look at that.
That's a hoot. My name's Jim McDonough. I'm the board chair and the production manager of the Park Theater Company, St. Louis Parks Community Theater. You're not going to surprise me if you say, what? What community theater? Where? Back in 2007, an organization here in St. Louis Park called the St. Louis Park Friends of the Arts put a little blurb in the Sun Sailor out here asking the community if anyone was interested in regenerating a community theater, because those of you that have been in this community, I've lived here for 46 years, but prior to my coming here, there were iterations of a community theater upon the impetus of the high school. So I came to the meeting at Lennox right here upstairs in one of the classrooms. And I said to him, I said, no, I'm not looking for the Klieg lights. I've done my acting in college and a little beyond, and I'm not looking for that. I said, I'm just wondering if I can contribute by maybe generating some funds. Oh, come right in. Welcome. We do 3 or 4 performances a year, depending on how ambitious we are. And we won't even talk about 2020 and a little bit about 2021, because COVID, the pandemic, was like an anvil hit the performing arts. We've been fortunate since 2013 to offer a modest stipend, a little bit of something to people that perform and work as technicians. I remember we performed the play Axel and His Dog by Don Stoltz, no less. Now, some of you out there may have just made it to remember Clellan Card and Axel and His Dog as a TV program. Some of you may even remember when he did it before he got the Little Rascals. Don Stoltz was the guy who worked the paws, Tula and Towser. You never saw Don except for his hand, and he worked that dog paw. Don wrote a play. Well, of course, he founded the Old Log Theater, but Don wrote a play called Axel and His Dog, about his relationship with Clellan. And like many comedic artists, there's sadness behind the smile, behind the painted face. And both Clellan and Don experienced some really significant personal losses in their lives. That comes out in the play. The play was recommended to us. It was our first major production. We did it at the church over on Alabama, the oldest church here in St. Louis Park. It's a historic little church. But that's where we performed it. And Don came. And he loaned props from when they did it over at the History Theater in St. Paul, where it really premiered after he had written it years before we did it. Ron Peluso, who is now just recently retired from the History Theater, was the one that put it on his short list about a community theater like ours. What would we do as a kind of inaugural performance? And Axel and His Dog was on there. And of course I lit up like a Christmas tree. I thought, that's the one we're gonna do, because I grew up every afternoon watching it. Our very first performance was written by Brad and Rachel Richardson. They were part of the Mount Park Theater Company. And Brad wrote Dr. Galen's Magic Medicine Show. And we kind of took it on tour, National Night Out, and its performance was at Wolf Park in the amphitheater. After Brad and Rachel left to create their own theater, the rest of us decided to do our performance here, written by one of our board members, Edgar Allan Poe's Tales of Woe, around Halloween. And we did it right here in this theater. There's no backstage here. No backstage. The little puppet there, but the wings here are literally standing room for 1.5 people. So it wasn't built, we had to come in, the gentleman back there, come in through the door, but we did it, theatrical people are always inventive. We used a white screen with the light coming from behind, silhouetted. So then you'd stand back there and then come out in front of the lights. Most of our major performances that we've done occur over at the Jewish Community Center, Saves their beautiful theater over there, 250 seats. So enough about the theater, what about storytelling? When I wear this top hat, the little ones immediately say, "Are you gonna do magic?" And what are the magic words for storytellers in our society? Once upon a time. 80% of us in this room, when I said those words, our physiology changed. Once upon a time. Well, I imagine that the next generation, the magic words might be in a galaxy far, far away, right? But in our time, our bedtime stories, our nursery rhymes, our magic stories, which leads me to the story that I want to share with you tonight. You didn't think you were going to get out of here without a story. I'm going to tell you a story once upon a time about a young boy who was born in Winston, North Carolina, with mixed heritage. His father worked as a janitor for the white school, even though he was a person of color. It's really messy. Nothing is demarcated, but his kids couldn't go to the school that he janitored in. And this young son was born into that. Mother, both parents had grown up in slavery. We're talking about 1890. But there was always talk on both sides of the family about Indian lineage, particularly on the mother's side. She definitely identified at least half of her genealogy with the Croatan tribe, which had kind of been assimilated in the general population, North Carolina. Young Sylvester Long was born into that context, and he was fascinated with the romance of the West, riding the plains, of being free in spirit and physically free. Sylvester's future was pretty well lined up of what he was going to do as an adult. So he did the only thing a true blood rebel would do. He ran away with the circus at age 14. The circus, after Buffalo Bill, had a Wild West component. A few horses, donkeys, and maybe even some exotic animals like a buffalo. But Sylvester was doing the scut labor and cleaning up it. But he learned some native language from the natives in the show. He was an eager, bright young man. And very personable, very charming, handsome. Well, when he was 19 years old, now he's literally a young man, he decided to apply to Carlisle Indian School, attended by, at the same time that Sylvester went there, Jim Thorpe, no less. And while at Carlisle, he excelled. Multiple languages. He actually trained with Jim Thorpe. He was Jim Thorpe's training partner for the World Olympics. If you are where I was when I came across this man's name, you're asking yourself, why have I never heard of this guy? Well, we'll get to that. He was the first Native American to be referred to West Point. He went to West Point, he took the exam, but he didn't finish the exam. He left in the middle of it. It's a big mystery. What? Why? Why? It certainly wasn't because of the questions on the exam, probably the questions on the biography stuff that he started to get a little nervous. But he left in mid-exam. So he didn't go to West Point. Instead he went north because he wanted to get into the fight. What fight? World War I. He went north to Canada, joined the Canadian Armed Forces, the Expeditionary Force, sent to France, medals of valor when he came back 3 years later, all over his chest. And one of the first places he landed was in New York City. And there was an organization, a club called the Explorers Club in New York. Famous. Teddy Roosevelt, people that were going to the North and South Pole, scientists deep in the jungles of Africa and the Amazon and South America, coming back and sharing their stories. Well, he came in, chest full of medals, speaking several languages, young man at 20, 22. Come on in. You remember. You got a story to tell. Oh, you could tell stories. Now, did he embellish some of his stories? Well, you know, I'm embellishing. I got to keep you interested. You know, there are only 2 people dozing off so far, but you know, I mean, you know, make it exciting, put you there. By the way, he picked up the name when he was at Carlisle. They called him Long Lance. Sylvester Long. He's a fighter, he's a warrior, he's an athlete, Long Lance. So Sylvester Long Lance. His fame, his notoriety increased. He did a lot in Canada to bridge the cultural divide. He literally became the spokesperson for the Native American people. He was honored by the Blackfoot tribe. They gave him the name Buffalo Child. And he did a lot of good. Drew attention, where you've got attention, what needs does the Indian school or the Indian tribe, the reservation need? He wanted to learn how to fly, airplane, because he realized that if he could pilot the airplane, he could bring the supplies and the rations that the tribes needed to them directly. And he did learn how to fly. Movie producers in Hollywood, we want to make an authentic Indian movie. They wanted Sylvester to be the star, and he was. And it was a silent film because it was still the silent era, right at the end of the silent. He's an authentic Plains Indian now, by his own definition. Perfect. Handsome, athletic, does his own stunts, out in the outdoors, and sparse living, brought the whole production crew up there, and everything was going swimmingly until the producer, a couple of them, but they, hey, we're gonna be launching this thing, we're gonna premiere it. We better do some vetting, we better, he's a nice guy, and, Yeah, he's got all the credentials, but yeah, let's just check it out. So they did, talking to somebody who knew this and that. Where was he born? Winston, North Carolina? Well, come on now. It's a far cry from North and South Dakota or Montana, you know? Oh, yeah, tricky. His parents are still living there. And they're not underground. He hasn't been back home since he left at 19. His brothers had come see him. He put that behind him. That was then, this is now. Once upon a time. Well, it didn't fit with the producer's story either. They were aghast. They're on the verge, I mean literally on the verge. The film is done. It's ready to be distributed, put out, boom, big lights. They told him that he was a fake, a fraud. They didn't know what they were going to do. The investment was there, it couldn't be recouped. Well, he took it hard. Who would? When bad times happen, I'm not taking his call. By the way, Jim Thorpe didn't even blink. Many did. And Longlands started drinking, started making even poor choices, womanizing. Cut a deal with the producer's wife. She was on tour, she had to go around the country. He was her bodyguard. But the deal was, you play ball with me, Sylvester, and get you that airplane you've been dreaming. That's what you're gonna get. How do you seduce a dreamer? Give him a bigger dream, right? Didn't turn out that way. The husband was not real keen. He knew what was going on, and he would have none of it. And they lived in a gated community, you know, bodyguards, armed men at the door, you know, and if Long comes around, number one, he can't be packing anything. If he's carrying a weapon, no. You know, we know he's on the skids. We know he's been drinking. Well, he shows up at their palatial estate, and they let him in. And he has a violent verbal altercation with his paramour. Nothing said about the husband, where he wasn't home or... But anyhow, she runs upstairs, tells him to get out, go away, he's nothing but a lowlife, and this is, remember the Seventh Samurai, this is her version of the story told to the authorities. And she heard a gunshot, and there was Sylvester on the couch. Had killed himself, bullet to the head. The family didn't buy it. Sylvester's family didn't buy it. It just seemed way too convenient. A solution to their problem, and as far as Sylvester was concerned, he was gone. The authorities quickly sent in the detectives. Open and shut case. Suicide. That's why we haven't heard of him. He's been buried with time. He was a real person. And a professor up in Canada, Donald Smith, had written a biography about him entitled Chief Buffalo Child Longlands, the Glorious Imposter. Well, And the family didn't buy it, and his older brother Abe didn't buy it, and they wanted it to be reopened, and it's still a mystery and a puzzle, unsolved, really. The official dictum is what it is, but circumstances, one would say, possibly not what the official reckoning was. I mentioned Jim Thorpe. Jim Thorpe contributed, Longlands had a foundation. Most of whatever wealth he still had left went to the Indian schools in Canada and the Indian reservation. And Jim Thorpe contributed, and he purchased Sylvester Long's tombstone. And there's a picture in the book of Jim Thorpe standing there at the gravesite. I wrote a play. I used a fake name. Seamus McDonough, without O-U, N-A-G-H, which is the spelling on my father's passport, who immigrated, by the way, in 1928 from Ireland. Yeah, but anyhow, I wrote this play, 2015-16. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Hey,
Yes.
ladies and gentlemen, our viewers at home for Park Arts Video Magazine. Tonight we have Jerry Wilson, Executive Director of United Artists Collaborative, performing arts organization. Jerry, could you say a little bit about your venturing into the short film, certainly the acclaim and the attention that it's brought to you and United Artists?
When COVID hit and we were unable to do stage performances, we kind of sat down and decided to move in, another direction, a direction where large audiences were not required. Whatever performance we were going to do on film, and then submit the films to, let's say, film festivals. If we get the go-ahead from the film festivals that the films that we're submitting are decent films, then we release it to the general public. And so that's exactly what we've done. The first film that we submitted was called The Shadow of Shakespeare, a dramatic comedy. And the second film we submitted was What is Dance, which is a documentary on dance and its importance in the world.
We really welcome you here tonight. As we get started tonight, we want to acknowledge the fact that we're meeting on ground that was once inhabited, and still is by some, but once the homeland and the territorial hunting ground of the Anishinaabe and the Ojibwe and the Lakota people, and we acknowledge that. I just want to introduce it. You know, my former life, I was a clinical psychologist, and neuropsychologists tell us that when it comes to memory, particularly our long-term memory, of our five senses, the one that is most connected to memory, can anybody guess?
Smell?
The sense, the olfactory, the sense of smell connects us to our long-term memories. And when it comes to baking, whether it was your mom or your grandma or your auntie, and you walked in the kitchen and there was bread baking in the oven, or a pie, or cookies as a youngster, I remember that. I remember that vividly. And I also remember my impatience about, when are they gonna be done? So anyhow, tonight we're delighted to have one such baker with us as our guest storyteller. Let's say hi to the maker of the sweet potato comfort pie, Rose McGee.
I put the hearts on each one.
She and volunteers are baking sweet potato comfort pies and delivering them to neighbors, offering a shoulder to cry on and a sweet dessert.
The sweet potato comfort pies are meant to be this catalyst for caring and building community.
Her mission started in 2014. Moved by protests in Ferguson, Missouri, she and her son loaded her truck full of pies and headed there, and then to the shootings in Charleston and Pittsburgh.
There have just been too many. I'm sorry for for the pain that our country is feeling right now. I wish there was a pie big enough to serve the whole human race.
Now it's her own city that needs healing.
Watching Rose in the kitchen is magical, but what's more magical really is watching that connection happen.
Hi there. Did you get pie? Sweet potato pie. Would you like that? That's what we brought out today.
My baby.
And her pies not only bring comfort in tragedy, but honor those doing good, like these volunteers at a local food bank.
You all are out here serving. Your first liners.
I felt appreciative because we gave out to the community and like they came back and gave back to us. Like we both contributed somehow, like we both came together.
She's even encouraging others to bake their own pies at home and help spread joy.
With these pies that you're making tonight, that secret ingredient will be your love.
Opening her kitchen and her heart to all those around her.
We all have something that we can do, and we want to find what that is and tap into that in a positive way.
Rose has delivered about 3,000 pies all over the country, and now in her hometown too.
Well, good evening, everyone. Yeah, I guess, just to tell the story, it's been told, and I am still in awe about it when I think a sweet potato pie. I mean, how in the world, who would have thought, right? But for me, I think of two women, my grandmother and my great-grandmother. I grew up in the rural South in Jackson, Tennessee. My father lived here in Minnesota, and during the summer months I'd come and stay with him, but during the school year I'd stay with, I call them the grand women, because it's my grandmother and my great-grandmother, and that's who took care of me. So growing up, I didn't really think about cooking any sweet potato pie. They did it, and I had other things that I did, of course, chores, but making a pie just wasn't it. And it really wasn't until I graduated from college, moved off to Denver, and I woke up one Sunday morning. I'm now married. I never was a great cook, but I woke up this particular Sunday morning, I'm going to make a sweet potato pie, and I'm going to make a blackberry cobbler. I was going to do this, right? So I called my grandmother, by now my great-grandmother, I called my great-grandmother Mama Allie, and I called my grandmother Mama. And by now, Mama Allie had passed away. So my grandmother answered the phone, and I'm named after her. Her name was Rosie. And I said, Mama, I'm going to make a blackberry cobbler and a sweet potato pie today. And of course, she knew I wasn't that great at cooking. She said, both of them, baby? I said, yes, ma'am, I am. So give me the recipe. And she says, I don't have a recipe. I said, well, how am I supposed to make it? She says, well, it's in my head. So she began to tell me, and I guess transferring from her head to mine didn't go too well because they were both horrible, just absolutely horrible. The blackberry cobbler tasted like rocks. It was just these hard things. It's horrible. And I just threw them both away because I didn't want anyone to see what a mess I made. Pretty soon, though, I felt compelled, this calling, to make the sweet potato pie again. And I did, and it was not as bad. And before I knew it, they say I'm getting pretty good at the sweet potato pie thing. So that's what I started doing, and you know how it is when you make something kind of good, they'll say, would you bring this, or would you bring that, or whatever, right? So it became the pie for me. And the next thing I knew, I was now living in Minnesota. Husband and I were now divorced, and I found myself still intrigued by a sweet potato pie whenever I could taste one. And the next thing I knew, I was tasting them and critiquing them, and if I tasted one that really was good, I wanted to know what's in it. So it became this thing, and the next thing I knew, again, I felt compelled to make more of them. So now here I am working, and I would take a sweet potato pie in, because at work we eat anything, right, that's brought in to the lounge. And the next thing I knew, people were asking, do you sell these? I'd really like to have one. All I can say is, the pie called me. I did not call it, because I definitely did not enjoy making pies. But what I did enjoy doing was when I discovered something in one that I liked, I wanted to try that. So before I knew it, I had this pie, sweet potato pie recipe now, that was comprised of a lot more ingredients that I'd just gotten originally from Mama. But I was getting ingredients from all over the place, from different people. And I started selling them after people were saying, you know, you should sell them. So I would sell them at the farmer's market. How hard that is. Anybody in here, you know, caterer or whatever, it's hard on the body. That's probably why I have 2 knee replacements now. But it's just very taxing on the body. I was working full time, and then on Friday night, I'd be up all night long making pies so that I could be at the farmer's market with them by 5 o'clock on Saturday morning and sell them, you know, over the weekend. Whew. So that's how that went for a couple of years. And then the Midtown Global Market opened. And I was invited to come in and have a business there. When I started working on the business plan, I could tell that's just not gonna work. I'd have to sell a heck of a lot of pies, and that is not gonna work, just to pay the rent. So I said, no, I won't be able to do that. So then months later, they came around and said, we're gonna have day tables, are you interested in that? And I was. So that's what I did for the next couple of years on weekends and holidays. I would make pies and sell them. Now, the thing is, people are peculiar. Did you know that?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
If you didn't know that, I'm here to tell you. And black people are really persnickety when it comes to sweet potato pie. And I'll never forget, I'm standing here and I always gave out samples because people would come by and most of them have never heard of a sweet potato pie, let alone seen one. That's, you know, more people who look kind of like you all. And so I'd always have to have samples because people were coming, oh, that looks like pumpkin pie. And my son was in high school at the time and happened to have been there, and he said, it's got more soul than pumpkin. So I started saying that all the time to customers, right? And there was a black woman who came by one day, and she looked and she said, you selling sweet potato pie? I said, yes, I am. Would you like to try a sample? Oh, no. I said, well, just try it. It's okay. She said, oh, no. I don't eat nobody's sweet potato pie but mine. I said, okay, that's all right, I understand that. And then she went on about her marketing business, and she came back and said, well, I have to admit, it looks good. I said, thank you. I said, you sure you don't want to taste any? She says, no. So she left, that was it. And then another time, a young black woman, there was a couple. He was looking at some stuff before they got to my booth, and she tasted the pie, and she said, this is really good. I said, thank you. So she said, honey, come over here. And he came over, and she said, you gotta taste this sweet potato pie. And he says, sweet potato pie? And she said, yeah. She says, it's so good. Now this is a younger black woman, right? And this is her black husband. And he said, I don't even know about sweet potato pie but my mama's. And she said, she looked at him and she looked at me. I said, it's okay, I understand. She said, but you gotta try this. He says, no. And he ran off like it was something that was gonna harm him or something. And she said, I don't know what's, I said, I understand, don't worry about it. So off they went. And then it would be one day, this was outside when I was selling them at the outside market. But one day I was inside at the Midtown Global, and this biracial couple came by, white woman, black husband. The white woman had tasted the pie and she's going on and on. So then she gets her husband, she says, you gotta come over here. This pie is so good. And he looks at it and he says, is that sweet potato pie? And I said, yes. He says, oh no, I can't eat that. I said, why not? Cause. Same thing. I don't even know about the sweet potato pie, but my mama's. And so she said, but honey, your mama's not here. Your mama's in Beloit, Wisconsin, and she's not gonna see. He said, oh no, I feel like I'd be betraying her. And she said, but it's so good. He says, look, if you wanna buy the pie, you get it. But I'm not. And he walks off, of course. And she buys it. And seriously, this is a true story. It would be a few months later. They came by. And I recognized it because who in the world wears their jeans so pressed and so straight with a crease except certain black men? I grew up with men like that. And when I saw those creased jeans come through, I remembered him. I really did. And I said, oh, I remember you too. And he said, she did. She said, yeah. I said, how was the pie? She says, it was really delicious. And I said, you didn't have any though, right? He says, well, I have to tell you the truth. I did have some, but I cannot tell my mother. He said, that pie was delicious, but I cannot tell my mother. So it's this sacred thing, I call it the sacred dessert of Black culture. And it's been a very interesting phenomenon to watch over the years how it's taken on this life inside of me that I never would have suspected. So here I am, realizing I gotta stop selling these pies. It's really hard, it's too much. And it appears that I'm making a lot of money because I'm selling them. But when you think about the time and the expense of these quality ingredients, it just wasn't. So I stopped selling them. But here I am now. Was it because I'd also just, like everyone else, had gone through watching this long trial, regarding the murder of, as far as I'm concerned, it was the murder of Trayvon Martin. And that had just concluded not so long ago. But here I am now, in my living room, watching television like everybody else across the country, of what was happening in Ferguson. And young Michael Brown Jr. had been killed, unarmed, just laying there in the heat for so long before his body was even removed. And now the people are upset, they're angry, and this is what happens, as Langston Hughes says, what happens to a dream deferred? And the last line of that poem is, or does it explode? And when people don't understand why, people get frustrated and they explode, and then, the protesting starts. And within that aspect of the protesting comes things that get destroyed and damaged. But people are in pain, they're hurting, and they're sick and tired, being sick and tired, as Fannie Lou Hamer said. And I guess some of that must have transferred to me that night because I felt like I needed to do something. Here I am, up here in Minnesota. What am I gonna do? What can I do? Am I gonna go down there and get in the middle of all that too? And this voice came to me just as clear, make some pies and take it down there. And I thought that was the most ridiculous thing. And being a woman of faith, it came back again, just as clear, make some pies and take them down there. And contacted this pastor. And when I spoke with the pastor down there, he said, I think that's a beautiful idea. I said, well, I'm glad you think so. And he said, now, I'll guide you on one condition. If you make a stop at one of my parishioners. I have a parishioner who's very ill, and I really think it would be beautiful if you were to bring a sweet potato pie. I made about 30 or so pies. I didn't just walk up to somebody and say, here, take a pie. But they wanted to talk about how they hadn't been treated with respect. They wanted to talk about how painful life had been for them. And why is this? Why does it continue? So everyone that I talked to, it was the same thing. There was this young girl standing there just fussing, beautiful girl. And she's just fussing at Michael because there was a makeshift, memorial there with all of the cards and the little gifts and things that people had brought where his body had been. And she's standing there fussing. I wish you'd just been at home that day. You should have just been at home. And I said, did you know him? And she said, yeah, we grew up together. He lived right there. And right behind what she was pointing were the projects that you would have seen, which is where his grandmother lived. And I said, I'm so sorry. Would you like a sweet potato pie? I handed it to her, and she opened it, and the aroma just came out. She said, it smells so good. I said, it does, doesn't it? And then she said, and it's so pretty. And you know, the hearts on top. And fell in my arms and started crying. And that's how it was with all of the stories. It was something special about each one. And then I came back and called my mayor and called a few people and invited them to my home to talk about what do we do with this idea now? Because right here in Golden Valley, where we live, stuff isn't right either. And it seems that we should be able to do something. And that's when we came up with a concept of over the Martin Luther King holiday weekend, we would bake. Volunteers would come in on that Saturday of the weekend and bake the number of pies that Dr. King's age would have been. And on that Sunday, people would come together and have conversations and talk about who they'd like to gift those pies to. And you would hear each other in these smaller groups. And then you decide among yourselves, you know, that story that you told about your daughter, that is so precious. Here, take this pie and give it to your daughter. And that's how it works. How many pies now since then have we made? Because the first one of those was in 2015. And just, about 3 weeks ago, we had our commemoration. And I couldn't believe it, we're now at 9 years. So this year in 2023, January 15th, Sunday, January 15th, which actually was his birthday, how many pies did we make? 94. 94, he would have been 94. Wow. So that's what we do. But after I came back from Ferguson, Charleston happened. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And someone said, Rose, you gonna take some pies down to Charleston? And I just didn't even think about it. I said, yeah. We get down there, first of all, an AME church, African Methodist Episcopal. And this particular night, we're in the room where this young man had actually gone in there, sat with the worshipers, thought about not killing them, if you followed the trial, you know. Oh, they were nice people, maybe I shouldn't kill them. But yeah, I do, I have to. And he shot 13 people, and 9 of them died. So here we are now, a few weeks later, and the next thing we knew, this media was there. And so this young white reporter stuck this microphone in front of Bishop Goff, because I hadn't met Bishop Goff. I'd heard, you know, Bishop Goff doesn't know about all of this, and I don't know. Anyway, the reporter said, how do you feel about this woman bringing pies sweet potato pies, and all the way from Minnesota? And he was a very distinguished looking man, and he said, well, why not sweet potato pie? That's who we are. And I about melted, because that's how I felt. Remember, I called it the sacred dessert of black culture. And I always say, whenever the microphone's in front of me, you know, with all the complexities that's going on in our society, in our communities, it calls for a complex situation around food. And the sweet potato pie is as complex as you can get, because everybody believes nobody can make a sweet potato pie like their mama.
Where to find out about arts in your neighborhood? Try the St. Louis Park Arts Scene page of the Sun Sailor, the Arts Entertainment Calendar. Then again, there's the St. Louis Park Friends of the Arts Art Talk newsletter and their art calendar. The City of St. Louis Park website, the Hennepin County Library Art on Exhibit, and the Directory of Public Art displayed in Hennepin County, and the Edina Art Center, the Minnetonka Center for the Arts, and the Hopkins Center for the Arts.
Dear Aunt Phyllis, it's your favorite nephew Kevin. I'm writing to thank you for the summer of '67. California, land of free, where it never rains and the mountains touch the sea. In the summer of love.